How you going, Doc Manny? Up today at Edelong, Gangsters Paradise, as I used to call it. A few gangsters back from the 1920s, 1930s come up here to live. Wondering if I'm talking with one now, the great, well-known Peter Fab Fenton. Fab, thanks for your time today. Appreciate it very much.
No problem at all, mate. No problem at all.
Yeah. So what attracted you to move on up to Edelong? Let's start off here. How'd you come to this beautiful place of the world?
Well, we knew about it. My wife used to come here when she was a kid, actually, 5 years of age. Her dad had a little holiday place here. So she came here, and when Lee and I were married, we brought our kids here. And when we stopped living in Epping, when the kids moved out, we bought a holiday house at Pearl Beach and a unit at Leichhardt. So we used to live half a week there, half a week in the city. And a few years ago, my daughter rang me from Tucson, Arizona, where she married an American lad. She's lived there for 20 years. And said, "Dad, you're leaving Pearl Beach and you're going to Edelong." I said, "Am I, darling? Why am I doing that?" So she said, "Well, you don't suit Pearl Beach, really." She says, "You're a bit progressive for them." And she said, "This place is better." And I said, "Oh," it just in jest, I said, "I heard that Edelong was a bit down market." She said, "Dad, you played rugby at Parramatta, you coached at Parramatta, you coached at Penrith." She said, "Are you going to care if you see a young bloke going past with a long neck in a brown paper bag?" I said, "Not really." She said, "Well, go and look at this place. It's fantastic." So we saw it. It is fantastic, and we're sitting in it now. You can see it's fantastic. So that's how we got here.
Yes, beautiful beachside views. Have you actually checked out the little gangster element? How that all come about in the 20s and that? When you got the gangland people moving up here, yeah, around the back end of the razor wars and that sort of stuff.
I've heard about it. Yes, I've heard. I've talked to some old people who were here at that time. It was well after the 20s too. They were still here. But I know a plane used to land some stuff over on the beach over there near Pretty Beach. Used to drop the goods. um, well, mate.
In a bit of a secluded spot, really?
Yes, yeah. Well, who cares? I mean, I don't care if there are a few gangsters live this. Just meant they had good taste as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, it adds more colour to the whole thing. So I wanted to chat to you today about some of your life, your formative days, how you got in the rugby union, all this sort of stuff. So I'll start off with an obvious question. You've come out very many times in your life, openly said your public school education has helped get to where you are today, and pretty open about that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I was a very bright little kid. I'm not boasting. I was very bright at primary, and I went to the Select High School from our area. I grew up in Smithfield, and the Select High School was Parramatta High School, which was a terrific school, and it was the only co-educational Select High School amongst the 8 high schools, but they played rugby and they played cricket. So I learned to play rugby there. I played my first game there in 1949. I was 12 years of age. I'd been a rugby league supporter. My dad was a league supporter. I was a very keen supporter of West Rugby League. But I learned to play rugby at Para High, and I was only small, but I liked it. By the end of the 5 years there, I was the fullback in the first 15, weighing 8 stone 12, which is about as big as Hugh Bowman. I happened to batting in the first 11. I didn't tell them at school that I was playing A-grade tennis on the weekends. It was a co-educational school, so I had a girlfriend for 5 years.
I was going to say it would have been a big appeal, wouldn't it?
And
all the ladies.
it was, and I failed every subject in the leaving, so I had to get a job, and I got a job in the radio station as a panel operator, and eventually specialised in sound and so on. And even though it was about, I didn't play rugby after I left school. I figured I was too small to play grade rugby. I should have played it because I missed a lot of good years. I realised how good they were when I played it. Yeah. But in 1962, when I left school at the end of 1953, I decided to get a bit fit and have a game of rugby, maybe some level, who knows what level. And there was a man working at the recording studio that I was working at, and his son was Bruce Mason, who was the captain of Norths northern suburbs, first grade. He said, mate, why don't you go over, I was working in the middle of the city, why don't you go over and have a run around with Norse on a Tuesday and Thursday night and have a trial, see if you want to play there. So I went there, I had a few runs, and I went down and played the first trial. Midday I got there at Middlehead, and I walked in and we were playing Parramatta. Norths are playing Para. And the first bloke I saw was a young bloke called Doug Timmins, who was a wonderful, good footballer and a wonderful cricketer. Peter, he said, where have you been? He said, we haven't seen you. I said, oh, I've been doing this, this and this, you know. And he said, well, it's good that you're here. I said, well, I'm just going to run with North. He said, no, you're not. Don't be ridiculous. He said, get this jumper on. He said, look at all your mates are here. And suddenly I saw Graham Morgan and these people who've been Parramatta High School boys. So I put the Parramatta jumper on. And I remember I was standing on the 25 on the sideline waiting for the bloke to kick for touch from the 25. And in walked Bruce Mason. And he said, Peter, you got the wrong colours on. I said, it's all right, mate, fine, I've just changed my mind. I'm going to play for this mob instead. So I started playing for Parramatta, and I was 25 years of age. I couldn't believe how stupid I'd been not going straight there from school, because it just changed my life. I was single. I could get home whenever I liked. I could go where I liked. The first year I was there, Rod Phelps arrived, a great player from Norths, to play for Para. I remember the first beer and pie night. I can still remember the songs, and I thought, what have I been missing? So it was essentially Parramatta High School being very keen on sport and being co-educational that prompted me really to be a footballer, and eventually, of course, to get into coaching.
Yeah. There you go. I like the sound of that story. So I'm just going to say, I'll take it down the path. The same thing happened to me. Wheels fell off the bus. My education, my $12 high school education, when the girls got involved, the girls got better looking. I changed schools from Cambridge Park to Windsor, so I went from a football school to another football school, and got very distracted by short skirts, and education was gone. I'm sure the same thing happened with you there.
Well, we used to watch our girls play hockey, and the girls used to watch us play rugby. I thought that was fair.
Yeah, that's good. Now, I believe you did some sound work back in the day when you got started off too in Paddington. You cut out some of your formal skills down there, doing some work in there.
Well, having done so badly academically, I needed to get a job. And I looked at that time, this is again in 1953, so there were plenty of jobs. There were 2 or 3 pages in the Herald every, or at least once a week. I had a little look down the things, and they all sounded very hard and tough. And then I saw, come and work in Radio 2UE's presentation department. And I thought, I don't know what it is, but it sounds good. So I went there to apply for the job, and though I'd failed, as I said, academically, having done 5 years at a select high school, I was highly overeducated to just sit there and play records, spin records, because in those days, virtually everything you heard on radio was on a record. It was on a gramophone recording.
Yep.
The recorded commercials, obviously the music, Nat Cole and Frankie Lane and those people, they were on record. But so were the serials on 16-inch wide transcriptions, which ran at 33 and a third revs a minute, lasted 15 minutes a side. They were the serials. So I got this job, and I'd sit in a booth with 6 turntables, and then an engineer room where they used to patch the programs, around Australia, and then the announcers studio. And I was there for 2 years working there, and I got quite good at it. And I then moved into what they called their production department. At that time, only Radio 2UE and Radio 2GB, who were really the big stations, recorded their own stuff. They recorded their own radio commercials. They recorded plenty of music for jingles and so on. They recorded serials. So suddenly I was sitting in a booth again with 6 turntables spinning. But they had the theme for the serial and sound effects, cars and gunshots and things, all on record. And the actors in the studio in front of you, and they were good actors, Million and people like that. And so I was actually making the serials that I had been playing on the air. And in '56, the bottom fell right out of radio production, because all the money that the big people were spending went to television advertising.
Yeah.
So I was doing very little. I remember this to this day. It was late 1957 because I just listened to the Melbourne Cup, standing around the big piano, the grand piano in the studio at 2UE. And I backed a horse called Pandy's Son who ran third, so I can look it up, and when I forget what year I left, I can have a look at that. So that was 1958, and the phone went, and a bloke said to me, "Hey, you're Peter Fenton?" I said, "Yes." He said, "My name's Merv Murphy." I said, "Hello, Mr. Murphy." He said, "I want you to work for me." And I said, "How do you know?" And he said, "Well," he said, "I know what you do, and I know what I want you to do, and you'll be just fine to do it." I said, What is the job?" He said, "I want you to be a film mixer." And I thought, a film mixer, it's a strange term, you know. And I thought I might be going to Hollywood and film. And I said, "I don't understand what it is." He said, "Don't worry about it, son." He called everybody son, Merv, he's a lovely bloke. "Don't worry about it, son." He said, "Let's get to the nitty gritty. What do you earn?" And I remember this too. I said, "I'm earning £18 a week." He said, "I'll pay you 25. And after you've been here 2 or 3 months, you will have learned to do a very simple thing we call optical transfers, and then I'll pay you 30. I said, "I'll be there Monday morning." So suddenly I was a film mixer. And what that entailed was just balancing, mixing the soundtracks of television commercials, where announcers a voice like, you know, Kev Gillespie or someone like that comes in and records the ad, and then you put a bit of music underneath it, mix it together, and Bob's your uncle, easy peasy. And then I worked there for 2 or 3 years, and I left and went to another studio. And in about the early 70s, there was a real renaissance of the Australian film industry. There was a big pickup, mainly because the governments, 2 governments in a row, one a Liberal government led by John Gorton, who had been an arts minister, who lost to Gough Whitlam, who was an arts minister the prior PM, and they had a bipartisan agreement, not necessarily on paper, but they both believed we should have the film industry back where it was, because in the early 1900s, Australian film industry was terrific. It was a leader.
Yep.
But the Americans had bought up all the production, all the outlets and so on during the war, and we did nothing for several years. So suddenly there were films being made. So they set up film schools. They gave a lovely taxation relief to genuine investors in Australian films, and people came out of those schools like Peter Weir, Bruce Beresford, Fred Skepsey, who was a Melbourne bloke, Timmy Burstall, a Melbourne bloke, and suddenly we were making feature films, and I was at the top of my game, so I just fell into the spot. So I mixed a lot of pictures from early 70s to late 90s. I mixed the best part of 150 films.
Did you ever meet any people like Errol Flynn or George Lazenby or anything like that?
See, it's post-production. So you didn't. The only time you met the actors was when they came in to do their revoicing, which was.
Oh, so they did that sometimes, yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Very few films don't have some stuff revoiced, whether the director wants to change the performance a bit by the actor, or more often just because you shoot in very difficult conditions, by the surf, heavy traffic, very windy day, rainy day, whatever.
Yeah.
So we met the actors then, but it was all post-production. The film was shot and it was edited, and the sounds were all there, but they weren't blended together. And so you sat at a big console. I always work with 2 other people. They now do it on their own because so many things are automated, which is one of the reasons I got out of the game. I didn't like the way they did that. I don't like the way they do it now. That sounds good now, don't get me wrong. And the fidelity of sound now on film is just so amazing. It's unbelievable. But so you would sit in a mixing studio, a mixing theatre, for, generally speaking, it took 2 weeks to mix a film, which was a very short space of time. And you blended the music with the effects, and eventually when stereo came in, you made sure your effects mixer made sure, the helicopter that came in from the left sounded like it came in from the left, and so you got a lot of directional stuff right. And we blended the soundtracks of those movies together. Well, they made a lot of wonderful pictures, Australia, in that period, especially early on, I think. I mean, I didn't mix them all, but I mixed a lot. I mixed Picnic at Hanging Rock, Gallipoli, The Year of Living Dangerously, The Devil's Playground, Skepsi's first big picture. Newsfront was Phil Noyce's first big picture. And so I just spent my life then mixing pictures, and in about 1976 I was offered the job to coach Parramatta rugby.
Yeah.
Because I'd played rugby at Para till early 70s. Offered to coach the team, and I had to make a decision whether I could do the mixing, which was money,
Yeah.
and do the coaching, which was purely amateur. But that was good because it didn't mean I had a decision to make about, like, you're going to go and play live golf or not.
Yep.
You're going to stay where you are, because there was no money in the coaching. So I had to make a decision whether I could actually still do a good job on the films and get the coaching done.
Yeah.
And I spoke to Tim Burstall, who was a lovely bloke, a Melbourne bloke who sadly is not with us anymore. I said, Tim, how would you feel if I couldn't work late on a Tuesday night or a Thursday night, and you wouldn't see me at all on a Saturday? He said, could you get the film mixed? I said, yeah, sure. He said, well, what's wrong with it? There's no problem, is there? What's the problem? And I told him what I'd been offered, and he was a Melbourne guy, so he was AFL crazy,
Yeah.
or Aussie rules as we all called it then. And he said, mate, if it's a good opportunity, never knock back a good opportunity.
Yeah.
So I decided that I would be a mixer and a coach, and at the same time, and I was able to blend those two careers together until I quit actually working, 1997.
That's a pretty amazing story, really. So, you obviously want to go back. So we'll look at some of your childhood. So, who were some of your sporting heroes as a young guy growing up? So you told me about your affection for Les Darcy. You obviously got Don Bradman poster on the wall. A couple of pictures here of the Don. You got some good jockey ones here too. Where is it?
All those black. When my dad was a plumber, born in Sydney, went to Boggabri to make a quid in the Depression years.
Yep.
Met my mum, married in Boggabri, which is northwest New South Wales.
Yep.
Yeah, 320 miles northwest of the GPA to be exact. And he was a terrific plumber, and he was working very hard and so on. But he attempted to join the army when the Japs attacked Pearl Harbor, and then took Singapore and so on. And he was found to have tuberculosis, so he had to come back to the city, or at least to the seaside, and get a different sort of a job. So I came with him, naturally, and I got here in 1942, so I was 5 or 6 at that time. And we lived in Curl for 2 years, just off Pitt Road, and we started to go down and watch Manly play rugby union. We'd go Manly Rugby Union this Saturday. When they played away, we'd go the other way, same bus, going back to town, and watch North Sydney Rugby League. So my first heroes really were North Sydney League players and Manly Rugby Union players.
Yep.
And then when we lost the flat at Curl, which was a terrible disaster from our point of view, we went to Smithfield to live, and I became a Magpies fan. This before Parramatta League came in. The league came in 1947.
Yep.
So this is about 1944. So I became a Magpies fan. And in 1948, which was my last year at primary school, a little bloke, two young blokes came down, both orphans, to play for West. One was called Keith Holman. One was called one was called Frank Stanmore. Yep. Vic had been there and left and gone to England. Came back later.
Yep.
But Holman and Stanmore went straight into first grade. Holman didn't. They both became great players. They played for Australia when Australia won the Ashes in 1950
Yep.
against the English. So my first really big hero, football-wise, was Frank Stanmore, who I got to know 50 years after I saw him play, because I wrote a lovely poem about him, which was published, and I eventually said that poem for him one night, and we got very friendly. He was a lovely, lovely little bloke. But I also went to see Bradman bat 3 times. Bradman batted in Sydney in the second test in 1946. And that was his first test after 1937 or 38. And he got 234. I saw him the following year against the Indians when he played for an Australian 11, and he got 173. That was his 100th 100. And I saw him after he came back from England in 1949. He played in a testimonial match, and he got 50 odd. So you can't believe what Don Bradman meant to the Australian sporting people. At least you saw him. And from the time they saw him coming down the race, they started to applaud. Everybody stood, everybody cheered, everybody applauded. He'd walk out, take block, look around the field, they were still applauding. They'd applaud till the bowler started his run up. So he was a big hero, obviously.
So I read a story about Don Bradman a little while ago after his first Ashes innings, so 10 and 2 or something like that.
Yeah.
And one of the English players slated him, and they got brought up for the rest. It still gets brought up today, like nearly 100 years later.
Yeah.
Just goes, he's just got, you can't read the ball, he's not going to make it, doesn't demonstrate the skills of even a club cricketer, and then...
Well, he was unusual, Bradman. He had a very exaggerated left-hand grip. It turned around a long way, which meant when he hooked the ball, he hooked virtually to the ground. He'd hook a fast bowler and it would bounce in front of mid-wicket, well short of the bowler, of the fielder. And he did have a different style, and when he went to England, they doubted it would work. Well, that's all right. They make their predictions, and but his hand-eye thing was so great. He could just. And the thing about Bradman, which is very few people know, he had 70 completed Test innings. In other words, he had some not outs.
Yeah.
He needed 4 runs more in one innings to average 100. He hit 7 sixes in Test matches. Full stop.
Yeah.
Now,
so most of his runs were from grafting runs.
Well, no, not the grafting. He just didn't hit them in the air. I got to know Neil Harvey very well. He was a hero of mine. He's a beautiful player. Neil Harvey.
He's a good all-rounder too. They say that Neil Harvey is probably one of Australia's 3 best all-rounders.
No. Miller was.
Yeah,
Keith Miller.
Yeah.
Miller from that same tour. Harvey was essentially a batsman, left-handed bat. But Neil Harvey told the story when he was in England in '48. He's the last surviving member of that invincible side, Bradman's side. And he wasn't getting any runs. He'd made 100 in his first Test innings out here against India. 153, and he was batting, not getting any runs early in the '48 tour, and he spoke to Sam Loxton, who was an older man and a mate of Bradman's, and he said, "I wonder if you'd have a yarn of the Don." He said, and he might have a clue that about might get me some more runs. Fair enough. So Loxton asked Bradman, could he give Harvey a bit of some advice about how to score more runs, and Bradman said, "How's he getting out?" And he said, essentially being caught. He said, "Well, tell him to hit the ball along the ground." That was the answer. Full stop. That's all he said, but that's all he meant. Bradman lofted the ball very rarely. Yeah. He hit his hooks along the ground, and he drove and cut everything, mate. He very rarely got caught, Bradman.
Yeah, I saw him play a lot of stuff on the offside. So I haven't seen that many clips of Bradman.
There aren't
a lot
enough.
Of offside clips, yeah, onside. So they didn't do the thing now. Oh, we're going to go over the top of mid wicket, go for the high and mighty stuff, massive sixes. But
no way.
It didn't appear to be that way.
Yeah, and don't forget that if you see the bats, those fellows use them.
Yeah,
hitting
very
a six,
lightweight bats.
hitting a 6, you need to hit it right in the middle of the sweet spot, or it wouldn't get to the boundary. Yeah. Now you can top edge a 6.
Yeah. Well, I'll see it in T20 now. Reverse sweep.
That's right.
Flick it off the back, and
that's
there
right.
you go. Oh, over the fence.
That's right.
And played.
But he was a hero.
Adverse conditions as well. So, do you ever really give cricket a role when you were growing up?
Oh no, I played it at school. I happened to batting. I wasn't a really good cricketer, but I loved cricket, and I still love Test cricket. I don't watch the other stuff much.
Yeah.
I got to accept one-day cricket, and it took me a while. But I love Test cricket. I can sit and watch Pakistan play India and not care who wins or who scores, just to watch how they play.
Yeah, the strategy of it.
Yeah, I just love the game. I think it's a great game.
Yeah. So, coaching. We're going back to the second love of your life behind your wife and your family, and the most long-suffering thing that they're probably used to. So
she'd like to hear that, actually.
Yeah. So, you can afterwards. I'll flick you here so you can get used to it. So you took on coaching because you just didn't appreciate the finer things in life, and you wanted to give yourself some torture.
Well,
How was the whole experience?
no,
Because you come to the Two Blues when they were developing really into
yeah, when I played, we were in the dumps. When Rod Phelps arrived, we lifted dramatically, and the most dramatic change came because Eric Tweedale was the main mover in creating the Parramatta Junior Rugby Union. So when I played in '62, and as I say, I was 25 years of age, most of the players were ex-Parramatta High, maybe a few King School fellas perhaps, and people who actually lived in the district. But when the juniors started coming through by late '60s, everything, we all went up a grade. Everybody went up in level and ability. And by the time I coached the first grade team in 1977, I did coach 1 year, the fourth grade, when I first stopped playing, and I found I couldn't be there often enough because of the films. So I was made a selector for the club, and I'd go to training, whenever I could. But in '77, I was asked would I coach the first grade team, and I had a talk, as I told you, to Tim Burstall, and thought, well, I'm going to do this. I went to a 3-day coaching conference up at Hawkesbury Ag College, run by Dick Marks, who was the convener of the coaching, but that was Rothman's coaching then. Yeah. And they had coaching in cricket, rugby league, everything. And I came back to coach first grade, and I had a bunch of young guys. A couple were a little bit older, but not that much. But mainly young fellows who had come through the juniors. They were used to winning, used to playing aggressively and so on. And we actually won the competition. Yep. Now, this is my first real go at coaching. It was the first time we'd ever won the comp. We started in 1934. That's correct. Yep. So we were 43 years winning the comp. Yep. And we won with young players. Most of them were juniors. I think there were 12 came through the juniors. Warren Rabili was a King School boy. Tomo was from up the bush, up the mountains. One other lad, I think, Phil Clements, was a Hawkesbury Ag College boy. Yep. But the rest were Parramatta juniors as such. Yep. And they just knew no bounds. And that team produced Tony Melrose, Mick Martin, Martin Knight, Lance Walker, Phil Clements, Donald Price, all wore Australian jumpers. Yep. Don Price got to go on tour without playing, sadly, but the rest of them actually played Test rugby. It was amazing.
So do you think that was essential that you got all the juniors? Because I've interviewed Harry Kimball before, and I bought Dick Marks' book too, actually, on the recommendation of Dave Moffat. Said, buy this will tell you about what's wrong with rugby. Yeah. And he unloads. He doesn't want to hold them back. Telling you what he thinks. And I like that. He's outright person, outspoken, just tells you what he thinks about the whole thing. But do you think that... so Harry showed me a book that he penned for West Harbour, and it just surprised me, the footprint. So from West Harbour, when they come in 1901, they had everywhere. So south down to nearly southern districts like Port Hacking, north to Hornsby, west to wherever, west to Perth if I wanted it. And just can't comprehend that. And the West has always been treated like everyone will get their players from out in the west of Sydney, but it's not given a respect I think it deserves by the big clubs in Sydney.
Well, it's a fairly complex issue. I mean, Penrith should be as strong in rugby union as they are in rugby league. Yeah. There are as many players out there, particularly the Polynesian boys, but they've never been able to keep them. The good ones go. For instance, young Beale, great player, was a Mount Pritchard blackfella.
Yeah, Mount Druitt.
You ask him, Mount Druitt, that's right. Mount Druitt. He says, Fab, I'm a Mount Druitt blackfella. But there are reasons. They haven't been... look, I think it'd take too long to say what's wrong with it all. Yeah. But when I went up there to coach in 97, and I was well past coaching, but I had friends on the committee, and they said, we need some experience, someone who can go to town I don't mean go to town, yelling and screaming, but go into town and see, the top level guys and say, look, this is what's needed. This is what's got to happen. I went there to coach. I took Scott Johnson with me, who was a fantastic coach, by the way. I've never worked with a better coach than Jono. He's a better coach than I was. And we said to the rugby union, look, you've promoted this team too early. They weren't the best team in second division then. You've promoted them too early. There are good people there. They're just dying on the vine. You're just gonna destroy because you can't win when you're outclassed. So they said, what do you want to do? And so Jono said, look, we want you. Why don't you give us 3 development officers who will play first grade rugby? John Winstanley, the boss, said,
Don McInnes.
Yeah, couldn't. No. John Winstanley was the boss of New South Wales Rugby Union.
Yeah.
Sydney Rugby Union or New South Wales. Either way, he's the guy we're talking to. He said, that would be a restriction of trade. We said, that's rubbish. All you got to do is say to this bloke, look, you want to be a development officer? You play for Penrith. This is your pay. Boom, boom. Yes or no? Anyway, it took us a long time. We convinced them. We got 3 guys, and they were working from Eastwood to Hawkesbury Valley to Katoomba, if you don't mind, down to Camden and back to taking in all those areas, 3 guys, and they played first grade for us. They brought some mates. Peter Bessling was one of those players. His best mate was Cowboy, McQueen.
Yeah. Funnily enough, Peter Bessling, you know anyway, Peter Bessling was a fullback when he played at Hawkesbury Valley and a soccer player. And
yeah, well, he went to school. He went to school in Penrith.
Yeah.
He lived on the Hawkesbury at a ski resort.
Yeah.
And that was his parents' thing. Anyway, so he came. He brought a mate. Dennis Coffey was a local businessman. His son, Craig, was a very good centre who left to play at Warringah because there was no first grade rugby. He came back. We found a little guy called Buddy Ware who could really play up here on the Central Coast. He came, and suddenly we had 7 guys instead of 3, and then we also had discipline training and so on. We won no games in 1998, and in 1999 we won 10 and played a draw. And we thought, well, at least we've got here now. They've understood that, there's nothing irrational about it. And suddenly New South Wales, who had a sponsor who went bust, suddenly realised they were broke. In walked O'Neill from ARU, said, we could fix you, but we've got to do a lot of trimming. They fired all the development officers, and we were back to where we were within 2 seasons at Penrith. So that's just one story, but the rugby union is totally, they're reactionary, not proactionary. You don't wait till McDonald's needs a spot to go to. They go there knowing the people are going to go there and so on.
Yeah.
And with the rugby, it was so obvious they needed to go there, put some work in, put in an academy, that sort of stuff. Yeah. They could have been as strong as the rugby league is at Penrith, and I've no doubt about that.
Well, Dave Moffat told me when he worked out the deal, because he was part of the team that worked out the Sanzar deal, the deal with Foxtel was $555 million for 10 years. He went into a lot of details when I've interviewed him a couple of times about that, and said they put Penrith there with the idea to strengthen rugby with the 2 Blues and all these, because Great area, it's where everything's happening in Sydney, and he moved on and never kicked on. So he went to New Zealand Rugby, and people wanted the money, but it didn't trickle down to the right areas.
Well, yeah, it's a complex issue, but you can just see how many people live there, how many rugby union players there are, young rugby union players, and all rugby league players, because a lot of them you can do both. They've got to attract some rugby union boys, but there's so many people, there's such possibilities, and yet they're the very bottom of the. It's wrong, isn't it? It's silly.
So you did a lot to develop. All 3 clubs you've been at. So you're at the 2 Blues when they're in the developing process on their way up.
Yep.
You did the same at Eastwood in the 80s. At Eastwood.
Well, they were pretty well established. Eastwood. They were a very good side when I got there. I still look back on Eastwood and think I should have been able to do more with Eastwood. Yep. We had a lot of wonderful players.
You worked with Chris Hickey, helped develop Hickey coming through.
Yes, and he came there He's a terrific bloke, by the way. He's one of my best friends in rugby, as is Scotty Johnson. Um, but we had a really good team. Like we had outstanding forwards, Tyneman. Um, we had a good pack. We had a terrific back line. Papworth, Johnson, Matty Parrish, Williams, Roebuck. A little bit later on, the other Joey's fullback. Can't think his name for the minute, but
Matt Burke.
yeah. Oh, then eventually Matt Burke. I mean, Matt Burke was a wonderful player. So Matt Burke arrived essentially as I was sort of leaving, but mate, we should have done better. We should have got a comp, and when they did get the competition, I thought it was fantastic. That was under good bloke John McKee, but I don't take too much credit for lifting Eastwood up. They had a lot of good players.
Yeah. So even when you moved on from Penrith, like I said, you helped. So they got 10 wins and a draw. They finished, I think it was 8th in the comp. They missed the top 6, but it was the best ever performance and rollout. You really helped give Scott Johnson the opportunity, and he then went and coached Scotland, and he came back.
Wales first. He went to Wales with the New Zealanders. He's a good mate of Steve Hansen.
Yeah.
He went to Wales with Hansen and the other older coach. I always forget his name. Good coach too. Anyway, he eventually he was officially the assistant coach, but he was doing a lot of work. I went there when they won the Grand Slam for the first time in 25 years. That was, I don't know, 2007, somewhere around there. And then he did go to Scotland. He went to Ireland. He also went to America and was let down very badly in America because he was very keen to see America. He regarded them as the last frontier. Yeah. I talked to Ray Price, who I know still very well. Ray Price played against the Americans in 1976 on the way home from the Wallaby tour, and he said to me, Fab, if they get organised, they'll swamp the world. They've got so many great, big, strong, quick athletes. How are you going to hold them out? And when I coached Sydney in 1982, 3, 4 and 5, in 84, we played the American Eagles at the cricket ground under lights, and we beat them, I think, 13 points to 9. And I had 10 or 11 Wallabies in my side. Yeah. So America has always just been sitting there and never ever
quite got to the next level.
Never got over the edge. I don't know why.
Do you think Major League Rugby is good for America?
Well,
tapping into the market. I would say if in NFL you got NFL, then there's nothing. So if you don't make NFL, you do nothing.
No, sure.
And you can be a footballer.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Mate, the game has changed so much as far as finance is concerned and private money and so on. It's never gonna be what it was. From the time I went professional at the end of '95, the game had to change. I mean, I used to MC those rugby lunches, and in 2 successive weeks or two successive lunches, John O'Neill spoke, and he was the ARU CEO, and his offsider is now with the Olympic movement. I can't think his name. I'm getting too old. Think of names. I mean, they both said we wish rugby was professional after grade, from grade up. Matt Carroll. They both said the same thing. We would love to see rugby professional, but after first grade. Well, I said, do you want the tooth fairy to come back? I mean, it's professional or it's not. And once it is, you can't have a willy-nilly thing of what's professional and what's not professional. So the rugby code is going to get more and more involved as far as rugby, as far as money's concerned. The way the money comes in, the way it's handled, how it's used and so on, is the future of the game. But in all honesty, rugby as I played it is not rugby as it's played now.
No, that's what I was going to say. What are some of the differences you see from rugby when you were playing in the 50s and 60s compared to what we've got now? Like I would say, obvious differences I can point out. Got big professional athletes, like I'm 6'5", there's guys that are 21 that are bigger than me,
Sure.
not much lighter than me,
Sure.
and they're full-time athletes. If they didn't play rugby union, they might play rugby league, or they could do 10 other different things. As
Whatever. Well, obviously on the pitch, it's so different. The guys are bigger, the guys are stronger, the guys are, and in many positions, they're more skillful as well. Tight forwards, I mean, that big boy Tofu, he can run and flick passes like Mark Ella, but to watch the game now, I don't find nearly as exciting as I did when forwards were forwards and backs were backs. But you can't change that either. It's never going to change unless you change some of the laws. Yeah. I think the scrum has become far too important. In rugby league, it's a farce, but in rugby union, it's almost as big a problem on the grounds that it's so far the other way that the game can virtually depend upon your scrum. I mean, I see a good backline now standing there, 45 yards out, scrum, they got a scrum, they can attack either side of the scrum. What do? They try to get a penalty. And if the scrum is strong enough, in 30 or 40 seconds, 30 or 40 seconds, they're 45 yards out, I'm talking about a really good attacking opportunity. It takes 30 or 40 seconds and suddenly someone breaks the line, not deliberately, on the team's being pushed back. Penalty. Kick down the corner. Defending team doesn't jump because they've got to get all their blokes in them. Their little ducks lined up in a row to stop the push from the maul. Ball goes in. Maul over the line. Hooker scores. Might be his 11th or 12th try of the season. The hooker's a leading try scorer. He hasn't passed the ball once. He hasn't caught the ball once. He hasn't run the ball once. And he's the leading try scorer. Yeah. I think that's what people, and I know in all sports as they change, people say, "Oh, you old blokes, you don't understand anymore." But that's the thing I think now is the greatest illustration that the game has gone wrong.
So that was one thing I was going to say. What do you think Rugby Australia as a whole need to do to re-engage with the public? Because it's very clear we disengaged with the public since, let's say, about 2007.
Well, again, I think I mean it's a complex issue, and I don't know all the answers. But I think this coach is a very good coach, Rennie. I do. I've watched him. Yep. I've seen him. I've spoken to him. I think he's a very good coach. I think that we've got to realise that we are a small nation, and now that the other nations are so professional, I don't think we've slipped as much as they've improved from when we used to win the World Cup as an amateur nation. We get 25 million people feeding us league, soccer, AFL, basketball now and all. We're going to have to put up with the fact that we might be sitting in 5th or 6th place for a long time. But that's not a problem if the game's entertaining and the people want to go and see it. And I just see the game now has lost so many. I know personally how many people, not of my age, I mean I'm 86, but I'm talking guys that are 56 or 66 who were players that I coached who no longer go and watch the game. Yeah. Because it's too much to do with power and not enough to do with skill. Yeah. Despite the fact that the players are more skillful than they were, half those skills aren't used much because it's all to do with getting a scrum, getting a push, getting on the corner, get a maul, score a try. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not giving you any answers. Yeah. I'm giving you all I can give is what I think's wrong.
Yeah. Well, I've even looked at that when I've coached as well. So, coached last time was side at Hawkesbury Valley a couple of years ago, and we didn't have the world's biggest side, and had decided how we're gonna try to play like effectively Islander football, crash the ball up through the middle with big guys. We didn't have them, or utilise guys we got, work a lot more on fitness and discipline, play like that. So we play what suit the team, and it turned the team around and helped revitalise things happening in the club. Thankfully, they're kicking on. They're doing very well. They're in second division subbies now for the first time ever, and just missed out on the grand finals. But there can be a lot said for that. So This is a part I'm looking forward to. You've been in rugby for a long, long time.
1949.
Yeah, 1949. There you go. I'm sure you've got some good stories or a story that can come out, a tour story or something like that. Like, how did this guy go that's sitting over here, Tomo? So, there's one more question. What would you do differently? Say you lost the 1979 grand final, unfortunately for you.
By a lot.
What would you do? But what would you have done differently if you could do that again?
Nothing that I know. I mean, that was I've had two dramas in my coaching life. That was one. The other was with Eastwood when we beat Randwick at Milner in the second last round of the year, and a terrific game. We scored two great tries to win, and we had one more game to play against St George, and we lost that game, and that put us out of the semi-finals. How we lost that game, I'll never know either. But, mate, you can look back and you can think all you like, but we prepared for the grand final in '79, no differently to what we did for the entire year. 2 weeks earlier, we'd beaten the full Randwick side at Concord. We just tied them down. They couldn't do anything against us in that game. I mean, I talked to Catchy about that, who I got to know very well later in life. Lovely man, Kenny Catchpole, great player, and they did the whole thing to cut Melrose out of the team in a way, and he might have been smarter than I was because I didn't understand what I should have done different. But mate, sometimes I just think sometimes the sun shines on you, and sometimes it doesn't. It's a bit like, I don't know.
So story wise, you've got to have one. You've got to have a story, an anecdote, or something. Some funny thing, something that's come out, just stands out. There would be, surely you've got something that stands out more than something else.
Okay. I'll give you one that the ladies will like too. This is to do with that team at Eastwood. That was the second last game of the year. We played down at Cars Park, and we lost. And after we lost, we came off the field, and the news had come through that West had beaten Warringah, I think, in the last minute, and so they got into the Final Four instead of us. So we sat around and had a few tinnies and just thought about, how bad the world was. And I had to drive home to Eastwood, and I've got a terrible sense of direction, and I'd never been to Cars Park before, so I headed off into town. I thought, go halfway to town, go left, and Eastwood will be there for sure somewhere. So I drove all the way into Camperdown looking for the turn-off to get to Eastwood. And it's now dark and it's starting to rain. And it's just awful. And I eventually I actually went through Leichhardt to get to Eastwood from Cars Park. And I got home and it was the night of the Eastwood Rugby Ball. Supposed to be a triumphant night, So, how you think, what if, should we run with the wind first? Should we have done this? And I'm thinking all this, and I came in and my daughters are there and my wife are there, and of course they didn't talk about footy. They knew not to talk about footy. So I said, look, I'm going to go down and get the grog for the ball, because in those days you took your own grog to the ball. Yeah. And Amy, my younger daughter, who then, that was 19, let me think of this, she must have been about 10 or 11 or something. She was born in 74. This was 88. So she's 14. 14. She said, well, I'll come down, Dad. She said, no, I'll get a video. And we'll watch a video while you and Mum are at the ball. Okay, fair enough. So I drove down thinking, what if, and all this stuff. And I got back and I had a shower, and I was finished my shower, and there's a loud rap on the shower door. And I said, who is it? She said, it's Amy. I said, what do you want? She said, I made it. I said, you made what? She said, you made it home. You left me in the video shop. And it was pouring rain. I had a look at her. She was wetter than I was.
So your wife would be real happy with you with that sort of stuff?
Mate, she still loves me. She lives in America, and we ring nearly every day. She's forgiven me.
Well, she tipped you out to this place, so that's a good start.
That's right.
I like that story. So I have to say, I could put my name up for Father of the Year for a few things like that too over the times. So you've had a fabulous life. been involved in sports and the movie sound producing, everything like that. What would you like to be remembered by in your life if you left a legacy, something that people could remember you by? What would you say that it'd be?
Oh, I don't know. I don't sort of think like that. I just like to see rugby, not that I should get credit for it. I just like to see rugby become more popular again, and I want to see kids playing rugby, and with the attitude that we had before professionalism. So what I want's impossible.
Yeah, that's probably realistic. So I saw something written about you. You're one of the great raconteurs. So who did you write that article yourself?
I've written a lot of articles. I used to write for Inside Rugby and stuff, and I've written quite a few books, of course, about sport. And the people that I've written about essentially have been really good, have been modest champions. The greatest breath of fresh air for years, I think, was Ash Barty. That's one thing I really think is great, how much women's sport is now not just well played, but appreciated. And this Australian cricket team, I think it's the best national team that we've got, any sport. Yeah. The Australian soccer team's a good team. To watch the girls play, I just love it. I think it's fantastic. And maybe that's to do with a co-education, like a upbringing. Maybe it's to do with just having daughters. But that's one of the great things of modern sport, is how the women have been recognised as just how good they are and how much people have taken them to their hearts. I think that's a fantastic thing.
Yeah, I have to say that's one of the highlights of all the stuff I do. So I write and do different stuff as well, and just to be involved in women's sport and see it get genuine coverage. I'd say the women's BBL is at least as good as the men's BBL in every sense of the word. They truly are.
Well, I actually like watching our cricket team more than our Aussie cricket team, not because we haven't got a good team, we have, but there's still more bluff and bluster. I mean, I believe when a fast bowler resorts to bowling mostly short pitch stuff, he's virtually lost the game. He's lost. Yeah. It's like, I don't know, fighting instead of arguing.
It's an intimidation style.
There is still intimidation in cricket, and I know people say, oh, they're bowling on leg theory or something. They're bowling to frighten the batsman out of the way and have him play awkwardly to defend himself. And I've never thought that was the aim of cricket, not ever. So the way the girls play it, and I should call them the ladies play it. I think Meg Lanning's a fantastic example. You can see the joy they enjoy. You watch our men's fast bowlers, and the bloke plays and misses, and the bowler stares at him as if he's been insulted. Yeah. I mean, he's played and missed. He should be smiling, and the girls are smiling as they walk back. Well, I think it's terrific.
Belinda Clark's the first women's sports person in the world to have any sort of bronze statue put up in her honour.
Correct.
At the SCG. So
that's fantastic, isn't it?
Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic.
Peter, thanks for your time. Really appreciate the chat. It's a very good chat, and I'm sure you got plenty more stories to tell as well. I'd love to delve deeper sometime, particularly if you find out a bit more about Les Darcy and everything like this. So have great interest in this sort of stuff.
All right, mate. Well, you should come to the launch of the Wairways Rugby Club in May 10. We'll have a couple of good guest speakers, and I'll do a few things also. So, mate, come along to there.
Yeah, absolutely, we'll be there. Thanks for your time, and catch you again later on. This will be online soon, everyone, so you can check it out later on.